Adventures in Imperfect Living.
Hey, greetings, folks. Welcome to Adventures in Imperfect Living. I'm Greg Willits from RosaryArmy.com.
And I'm Jennifer Willits, his wife.
Trying to figure out where I got all these things on my screen. I got too many things going on. Hey, how are you? Glad to have you with us, joining us for the program. Read an interesting book this week that I want to talk about. And whenever one of us is reading a book, there always seems to be discussions, because you want to talk about them. Whereas I'm always like, I'm going to wait for the show. I'm going to save because I don't like saying things more than once.
And that's fine as long as you remember to, in fact, bring it up during a show.
Well, and,
So
and
you can't
fortunately, this week I remembered it because it's only been a week, so I'm super hesitant about saying this is a life-changing book. And then I also hesitate because it's like, okay, it's a book on, in a way, I mean, if you're going to go to the bookstore and look for it, it's probably going to be in business or productivity, self-help, something like that. And so I hesitate to bring it up because then the immediate question is like, well, what does this have anything to do with Catholicism? And I really believe that it has something to do with Catholicism because we are all given various things that we are responsible for, and we're all expected to, if you have a family, if you have a career and that career helps support your family, you want to do a better job at it. You want to do the best job you possibly can in whatever you're doing. And so for me, it's an easy, complete, direct link that I very much, one of my most frequent things that I have to say in the confessional is when I was not a good steward of the resources that God has provided me with. And one of those resources is a job to be able to provide for my family as well as the ministry that we're doing. So I berate myself constantly when it comes to, am I doing the absolute best job I can for our family, for the creativity that God has blessed me with in my life? Am I actually using the gifts that he's given me in that regard, even if I don't fully understand their purpose? And am I being a wise steward of the funds that God has brought to Rosary Army as a result of the generosity of the people who support that ministry? These are very heavy weights to carry. I don't know how much you think about those kinds of weights. You seem to not have as much of an issue of just work needs to get done and you just do the work. Yeah, you don't seem to want to ask the whys or the specifics on these kinds of things. It seems to come, I don't want to make assumptions, it seems to come a lot easier for you.
Well, and it might be because the old left brain, right brain argument, not that it's an argument, but it's the inherent differences between creatives, super creatives versus the science, math, analytical, administrative, typical left brain sort of workers, where I know I kind of fall, I'm a little heavier on the left. And I'm not that I don't have any right brain qualities where that's, the musical, the arts, storytellers sit squarely on the right side. And I think you're a dominant right brain to my dominant left brain. And then you've got temperaments on top of that, which also informs the way we process guilt or anything, And so you're right. These things don't weigh that heavily on me. It's very easy for me to I'll just trust God. Okay, I'll do my best inside of a business day and do the best work I can. And I try to be as focused as I can, but is there room for improvement? Absolutely. I am prone to distractions like anybody else. And we live in such a distracted world where not just people want our attention, but software wants our attention. Social media wants our attention. Businesses want our attention. Email wants our attention. And so we're constantly being pulled around. But really, the only eyeballs you got to worry about the most is God's eyeballs on you and making sure he's pleased with what he sees. But yeah, I try to, have a really good productive day, and then I just keep going. I don't know. Like you've said many times that I've got I'm a little bit like a duck and how water just rolls off my back. How ducks are that way. I think you said that I was like a duck. Didn't you say I was like a duck?
Honey, I say so many things, I don't know what I've said anymore.
Okay.
That's part
All
of
right.
what happens when you don't, when you kind of stay on a shallow, superficial level on many things.
But I know you care deeply because, you have a big critical difference is you are the head of this household including the spiritual head, the literal, like head of household, because you are the man of the family. And I appreciate that about you. And I love embracing that sort of more traditional teaching of the Catholic Church, in that women submit to the men in their marriage. And I think it's beautiful. I love it. I'm like, yes, you take that pressure.
you figure it out.
Turn that over to you. I would much rather be over here cooking and cleaning, because those are my little crosses that I carry. And so I just assume I carry the crosses that I was meant to carry, and you carry the crosses you're meant to carry. And then together it's a complementary relationship, and we help each other out.
One of the things that I think, and I've been thinking about this a lot the last few days, that I believe is ingrained in me. And I would not say it's a something it's natural. I think it's something that I developed over the course of my lifetime, which is an erroneous belief that what I do is more important than who I am. And so there's been this long-term erroneous belief that I have to do a lot, otherwise I'm not valuable, right? And so that's something that I've worked very hard to overcome. And so what I appreciate about this book that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to tell you some of the things I've learned just in the last week. It's really been, let me preface this and say, this has been the most productive week I have had in years. And productive in terms of the value of the work, the amount of the work, the amount of downtime I've had. All these weird things came together in great part because I just implemented a few things that I think I already innately knew. But I've been operating from a viewpoint that is opposite of what I know is true and good and beautiful, right? And that is, I have operated from this attitude of, if I could do more things, I'm more valuable. So let me try to do as many things as I possibly can. And then the downside is that I'm not getting everything done that is important. And so I stay focused on the wrong, and then I fail to do the right. And so it's not that I've been sinning intentionally, but it's just my priority. So, to quote the great Ferris Bueller, a man with priorities so far out of whack doesn't deserve to drive such a fine automobile. My priorities have been completely out of whack, but I didn't realize they were. And my priorities have been, well, let me try to answer as many emails as I can. Let me try to be in as many places as I can to let people know about Rosary. Let me do as many things as possible without actually being effective. And I'd rather be effective than doing productivity things, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And so part of it is that I came upon this book called Deep Work: Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And I'd never heard of this author before, but apparently he has had multiple New York Times bestsellers. His name is Cal Newport. And it got on my radar because of another book by the same name, which jumped out at me right away. I've already been thinking a lot in the last few months, and particularly since the beginning of this year when we raised the funds that we did for the continuation of another year of Rosary Army, is what if I took longer periods of time to produce even higher quality things versus trying to knock out as many things in a short period of time versus looking at quality versus quantity. And then how do I quantify quality versus quantity? And is there more value in quality over quantity? And all these things, and I didn't know the full answers. And so I've been thinking about it, and I've been praying about this, and I've been trying to work at how to actually do these things in a more meaningful way. And so this other book, I saw it, and I immediately was interested in it by the same author, and it just came out this past March. And I haven't read this book yet. It's called Slow Productivity: The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. So a few words jumped out at me in that, right? Burnout, which is something I struggle with a lot. I will work very intensely for long periods of time, and then suddenly, without warning, I've got no energy left. I'm spent. I have no good thoughts left. I have no good ideas. My ability to actually get even the minimal work done can become very difficult, and it gets, quite honestly, scary. And if you read my book, Tied Knots, that came out a few years ago, it's out of print now. But if you read that, there was part in it where I shared a story like that I actually was afraid at one point, 2008, where I was in this very high intense period of a lot of busy work as we were preparing the first Catholic New Media Conference. And one day I went and sat down and started working and realized I couldn't remember a single thing from the day before. Like, just couldn't. It's not like I couldn't recall dinner. I couldn't. I had no memories, zero memories of the day before, and it really freaked me out. And there have been other times where this happened. It's normally that's for me a sign of, like, basically my brain has been zapped because I've overworked. And so I love the idea of doing meaningful things, but again, as I said, I get trapped in this loop of, if I do more, that makes me mean more, and that's an erroneous belief. What you do is not who you are.
Well, when you get completely depleted, where let's say you went negative, you went so far, can you not sense that you're approaching the floor, ground zero?
No, I'm normally sub before it hits me.
You.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, I would think that I wonder if there's a way for you to be more self-aware of that, so that you can pull out before you hit a nosedive situation.
Here's what's interesting, and here's what I've discovered. And again, I've only been able to put a week's worth of beta testing into this. What I've discovered is the type of work that I've done in the last week has felt more energizing than the shallow, superficial work that didn't yield as many results. That I would go sub-zero on energy levels. I can feel I have felt tired in the last week, but I haven't felt anywhere near a burnout. And so it's been different. So it's like the more meaningful things that are bringing meaning to me as a person aren't things I'm just doing, but I'm actually putting myself into these things more than I put myself into, like, an email or checking social media. So this book, so again, I was looking for the one book, and I was planning on buying this one book. But then you and I were running around on a Saturday doing a bunch of things, and you went into a store to get some stuff for Tommy for his birthday. And I said, well, I'm just going to wait in the truck. And I pulled out my phone, and I was searching around on the library's app to see if there was anything I could check out to read directly on my Kindle, while I was waiting for you. And I'm like, well, let me look to see if that author's book. I'd already looked once, so let me look again. And sure enough, the book I wanted, the slow productivity book, was not available, but deep work was. I said, well, I read a sample of it online. I'll read this, even though it was not my preference of the book that I wanted to read. And I got that one, and I started reading it, and I was really kind of surprised how fast I was hooked. I started seeing things in this book that I'm like, wait a minute, this is saying a lot. And again, why this idea of deeper work or more meaningful work is interesting to me is because of all the things that we're trying to do right now. Right now, and I'll throw you into the bucket with me here, and I say we are working on these things because even if you're not directly working on it, you have to deal with me trying to work on it or listen to me trying to figure out how to do these things. And so right now we're doing our weekly podcast. We'd like to get back to doing our catechism class podcast, and that's a very work-intensive project to sit down and write those things, let alone produce them. The writing is the hardest part. I have 2 different nonfiction book projects that I've been trying to work on, one of which would be turned into a School of Mary course at some point. And so here we are, we're at the end of April, and at the beginning of this year, I said I wanted to do work on those things. I plan on doing work on one of them during Lent, but I'll get to that in a minute, why I haven't done that yet. We filmed 3 courses already this year for School of Mary, but I wasn't getting them completed and posted and released. We've received positive feedback from newsletters, Rosary Army newsletters, that have made me see the value of longer narratives for Rosary Army. I've been releasing rewrites of chapters from my novel on Substack, but I'd go a month or 2 without posting a new one because I was so busy and I wasn't sitting down and doing the focus time. And what's really been scary for me is, like, writing and drawing and painting, creative endeavors that once brought me huge amounts of joy have become almost painful at their level of difficulty. It's to sit down and do it. The lack of enjoyment. And even last night I was playing the guitar and I said, it always kind of amazes me how musicians can go on concert and play the same song every night for a year or for years. And like, just sometimes just playing the guitar, there's an incredible amount of resistance, and just something that should be relaxing. But even reading more than 3 pages in a simple work of fiction was becoming challenging for me just in recent weeks. And I've noticed that the more projects I take on, the slower I get things finished. And so we keep adding things and adding things and adding things, and I'm trying to do them, all these projects simultaneously, and it's taking me longer to get them done. And then the slower things get finished, the fewer of the things get finished. And then the fewer things I finish, the more stressed, anxious, and irritable I become. And then I might be getting a lot of tasks accomplished for each of those projects. Project has tasks within them.
Mm-hmm.
I might be answering tons of email, planning out courses and projects, doing a lot of forward thinking. And again, I have this checkbox mentality. And, that I like to say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Excuse me, even though they might be small, little meaningless things. But then even as I'm checking these off, my checkbox list would lengthen rather than shorten. And I start to feel like I'm failing even when I'm working at an amazingly fast pace. And there was this quote near the beginning of Deep Work that just jumped out at me. The feeling that the more you try to do, the less you actually accomplish. And it reminded me of 2 books that we talked about years ago. I don't know if you remember. We were in Colorado when I read these 2 books. One was called The One Thing, which is the surprisingly simple truth about extraordinary results. It was written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan.
About 5 minutes ago, that title came through my
right.
mind.
The other one was by Greg McKeown, who wrote the Effortless book that we listened to on a road trip.
Oh, right.
But it was called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 books that I read. And when I read them, like, okay, all of the things I just listed that we're working on right now, or that I'm working on, but you have to deal with me. All of those things feel like they need to get done. They all feel essential. They all feel like the one thing. So I could understand the reasoning in those books, but I couldn't wrap my head around how do I actually focus on the one thing when they're all the one thing? How do I focus on the essential when they all seem essential? So both of those books proposed limiting focus on a particular project or a task until you finish that project or task. When I read those books, I'm working for an archdiocese, and then later on I'm working for a publisher. There was no allowance for just saying, you know what, I'm going to ignore my email and everything else that I'm doing, and I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to do anything else. Because I had a boss that wasn't named Greg to answer to. And so I've continued operating, though, as if I was still in those scenarios. Now, this book talks a lot about, well, even if you have a boss, how to, the Deep Work does. Basically, this is the big difference between this and those other 2 books. Deep Work talks about how do you actually talk to your boss to find the time to focus on these deeper things so that you're able to focus on these projects that will have more meaning, not just to you, but more impact to the world in general. In the other books, I don't recall them doing that. I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I read them. But all these things kind of came back up to the surface again because I've always thought about the idea of, well, what if I just said, okay, it's going to drive me a little crazy knowing that nothing is moving forward on certain things. And I mean nothing. If I don't do any of the smaller tasks, then that means that nothing is being done on certain projects. And that's scary. But then I stop and think, well, but if I follow the concept, and I'll get into some of the details of it, the concept of deep work, if I implement deep focus on these projects that aren't getting done, and I put my focus and made it essential and chose a project and said, that's the one thing. What if I started knocking these projects out 1 a month? And then suddenly what's happening? Whereas it's taking me forever to get one thing done, I could theoretically be knocking out a whole lot more by spending that focus time.
Okay. I'd like to make a few comments, if
Please.
I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, I sense that your initial attraction to Notion database was the hope that would be the thing that would allow you to be the super productive human being that you've always desired to be. But it created more, as you said a moment ago, but my to-do list just keeps growing and growing and growing because they're all essential. And now I have it all documented, and now I can look at it, and now I'm overwhelmed by the enormity of my own list. So you've had this search and this longing in you to find the way to be productive. And I know it's been eating at you. And now that you have the deep work sort of methodology in place, has the Notion database sort of been put not on the back burner, but is it lessening a little bit in its importance to you now that you aren't distracted by what Notion shows you on a regular basis of all the many task lists and project lists and it's like the brain outside of your brain kind of a presentation?
I would say no. I would say Notion has still been so one part of the book that he talks about is choosing your tools wisely.
Okay.
But being careful not to choose too many tools. So Notion, like I just used Notion for a long time this morning because I was working on my deep work and I was having a hard time in the tool I was using at the time. I had to move around a lot of parts. Notion just allows me to move stuff around a lot easier, and I was able to do that and pull it all back together again, and then I copied it over to this other system. But from a to-do list perspective, because Notion is more than just a to-do list, what I've done for my to-do list, if you look at it right now, and I could show a screenshot, but I'm not going to go through all that rigmarole. I have 2 things for today. That's all I've put down. 1, plan and record this episode that we're recording right now, and then post the show that I have to get posted. As soon as we finish this, I have to post that. I'm not going into the level of detail that I have in the past in Notion of like today, for example, there were 4 main parts of something else I wanted to get done. I didn't bother to even do that. I just know that's my deep work. So I'm almost not putting my deep work in Notion right now. It's only if this is from a David Allen getting things done perspective, which is capture the stuff that's in your head so it's not making noise in your head. These 2 things of posting this show and or recording this show and posting the next one, that was taking up in my head, and I just need to write it down, and then I literally was able to go back to my deep work then, knowing that it was there.
Okay.
But if I get caught up in the over and over of all the tasks, the minutia of it, yeah, it's terrible. So what I did instead, and I did this a little bit last week when I started reading deep work, I didn't go right to the deep work projects. I actually did spend some time saying, well, which of these things on my list do I want to have be the deep work thing or smaller things?
Where do you begin?
Where do I begin? And so I'm going to get to this. I really am. Because again, I'm not kidding you when I say last week was the most productive week I've had in a long time.
Well, another observation I had, actually this reminded me a lot of Dave Ramsey's debt snowball sort of way of thinking.
Yeah.
You analyze the totality of your debt, and you start looking at each creditor, the debt loads as separate things, and then you organize it by the smallest one as the thing to attack, and you attack it ferociously until it's gone.
Yeah.
And then you move on to the next one. So rather than trying to make little micro payments across the board to all the debtors all the time, and you're just not making any real gains, you tackle the one. So that's actually very similar to what you've described in a creative realm. It doesn't surprise me that it's effective because it works in the financial world.
I've had the same thought briefly. And when I say briefly, the only reason why it was so brief is because I immediately said, well, except the difference is with the debt snowball, it's a little, with Dave Ramsey's debt snowball, it's a little bit easier to determine what to tackle first.
Well, yeah.
Based on it's either what's your highest percentage rate, you could take it, that's more of an avalanche perspective than a snowball, or what's your smallest payment, pay that off, and then take whatever you were paying to that smallest payment and roll it up to the next one. With all the things on my to-do list, it's a matter of saying, well, what's going to basically, it's kind of the same, but it's a lot of guesswork. What do I think might yield the greatest amount of fruit? Or if I got that thing off of my shoulders, how much more energy is it going to free up for me to focus on these other things? So
yes.
it's a little subjective.
Yes, I get that.
In trying to, and so to that point, so I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit. And I'll just tell you one thing that I did. So the first thing I did, I started reading this book on a Saturday, read a good part of it on Saturday and Sunday, enough that I saw enough things that I said, I'm going to just try on Monday to go deep and really focus and use some of these principles that I've read. I had edited files, 30 plus video files that we had filmed in January for a learning path on the devout life. And we've been telling you about this for months now. We had Deacon Matthew Newsom on our show last year. He came to our studio the first week of January. We filmed this course with him. Been working to have these things edited, got them put together, final versions of these. Then the hard part for me is then going on to our School of Mary management system, organizing them all in order, writing descriptions for each of them, creating graphics, separating them off into different parts so that it makes logical sense, uploading or creating and uploading some additional resources. There's a lot of extra steps that have to go into creating the course. It's not as easy as sitting down, recording a video, uploading it to YouTube, and you're done. I've had these files for over a month, and I just could not because I knew I needed to focus to get it done. Otherwise, it's going to take me twice as long. And so I didn't even bother to start. I just kind of kept waiting for this versus making the time and saying, today I'm going to dedicate to it. I kept waiting for the time to show up, and it just wasn't. Well, that's procrastination at its heart.
Yeah.
So I sat down last Monday, and I just was determined I was going to go deep. I was going to focus in a way that I don't normally focus. I was going to stretch those muscles. And again, I'll get into the details of that. Long story short, that entire learning course, not only did I get the entire thing uploaded, edited, all the descriptions written, everything completed, and posted it and made it live on School of Mary's website, completely free, by the way. This full walkthrough of the devout life that I then uploaded our show, got that posted, and wrote a newsletter promoting both of those things and letting people know it's live. And writing a newsletter is very time-consuming. I got all those things done on Monday. I was buzzing. Mm-hmm. I could not believe the focus that I put. I didn't check my email that day until after 1:30 in the afternoon. I went all until 1:30 in the afternoon before I even looked at it.
Okay.
I didn't look at social media a single time.
There you go.
I didn't look on any news websites. I didn't allow my focus to go anywhere else but on the deep work that needed to get done.
But you had access to those, right? On your computer? Because you're working on your computer, and isn't your email like literally kind of always open and right there for you to see? Just click it.
I saw a funny meme yesterday. It was someone basically taking scripture and putting it in a Google world, and it was I'm gonna get it wrong, but it said something along the lines of, "But Lord, I don't have a single tab open," and Jesus said, "It is true you do not have a single tab open, but you have 53 tabs open, and the tab that you are on is not the one on which you focus." It's like, so,
wow.
Okay. So one of the things that I did right away last Monday, all the tabs that I perpetually keep open, I went through, and without even looking at them, I closed every single one of the tabs, including my email tab.
That is daring.
I basically emptied out my web browser so there was nothing there. And whatever I had there before, it was terrifying. It was terrifying.
Yeah, right.
I had some tabs that had been open
for a reason.
For months.
Oh, great.
Tutorials and things I meant to go to.
Because you're just going to get back. You're not quite done with it.
I have to go, and I just closed them all. And then and all week long, when I open up tabs, like right now, if you look at it, now this is a little unfair. I have several because we were troubleshooting something right before the show. So let me
Amazon is always a tab.
Well, no, that because look, I was doing a prep for this topic right here. So I had a couple things open that I was actually looking up, and so that's my notes for this. So now I have basically this right here.
Yeah.
I have a YouTube screen open where I uploaded the file that I'm going to post for last week that you've hopefully already watched. So that takes a while to upload that. So that's just that YouTube tab. It's ready for me to finish posting it. And then I have a few School of Mary things where I was uploading a different learning path.
All very legitimate.
All very legitimate. But that's compared to what I normally have, the tabs I normally
No,
have.
I know.
And the same thing for my apps. Most of my apps are closed as well. This one's not fair, Surfshark, because I had rebooted, and so that just opened up again already. But for the most part, the tabs that are open right now are just tabs I need for our podcast.
So obviously, I can see why that would be a critical sort of a workspace etiquette to have, is to close that stuff down. Don't even have it to where you can see it, but just have the one essential, software that represents the work task that you're actually going into a deep dive for.
And
That's the only thing you need to have open, and nothing more.
In the case of Notion, you were asking me, it's like I did all the prep for this topic right now in Notion, right there. And then I use it for planning all of the learning paths as well. Like to be able to have all of, I don't know what else I would do.
And here's what I do, dear listener. You're probably wondering, well, that's great for Greg.
Post-it notes.
But, he's a family man, and there's pets and children and, things just come up, or you have to interrupt your working spouse from home. And, let's face it, we live in a world where more spouses are working from home with, in fact, their families there. And they're feeling these pains like never before, where they need a home office and they need to somehow separate themselves from the demands of family life. So what I do to honor my husband's deep work desires is I pretend he just leaves the state. I literally.
Now, that's only been in the last week, and that's only because I've really.
But has it worked?
It has been great,
Yes.
and it's been helpful. I still hear. I'll tell you, the one thing that pulls me out of my deep thought are when I hear steps on the stairs.
Oh,
I hear steps coming up, and I don't know if it's you or Lily, and I'm like, and I immediately
You wait.
It'll stop. I stop everything, and I just kind of freeze, and until like I realize, what did someone just leave? Are you going up to Lily's room? What's happening?
Well, what if somebody's leaving, going down the stairs, walking away? You
sometimes
don't know.
I can't tell.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that pulls me out every time. And so I even have, I have a white noise machine, but that's not quite loud enough to blank out that particular noise.
And today I realized I needed something that was in this office, because I was writing, I had to send a couple letters to Rosary Army soldiers, and I want to have a professional looking piece of mail. And so I wanted the stamp that says Rosary Army, the return address. And I was, oh man, it's upstairs. And Greg is out of state. So I can't, I had to handwrite everything. And it's like,
Or you could have waited. Did you
no,
mail it
the
already?
mail was
Oh.
coming. I was under a time crunch, and I thought, okay, going forward, I should probably
That's
just
funny.
order a second one so I can have one in my office, and thereby negate the need to,
That's funny.
take yours. So little
Well,
things.
I mean, listen, for the last month of my therapy sessions, I've been talking about having a sudden lack of interest in everything. Just everything has been boring and painful.
Everything.
Well, almost everything, except for the one thing that I said that you could pretend that I wasn't out of the state for. That's the one thing. But having a constant fight against myself and lack of motivation, just constantly fighting, and then just absolute boredom, even in things that once had a great interest to me. And so let's talk specifically about what.
What did Peter say?
Well, I mean, he's kind of agreed, and thank you for saying my therapist's name on the show now.
Now that you said that's your therapist's name, nobody would have known.
So, I mean, he has seen it, and
Okay.
he's known that part of it is part of it is a lot of the things that we said before. One of which is this idea that I see more value in what I do versus who I am.
Okay.
Because that's kind of how
Alright.
I was taught. But this I want to give some specifics on this idea of what deep work is and what it's not, and some differences between this and the kind of work I feel like I've been doing historically before. But the idea that we're actually in a world where this idea of deep work is more valuable than ever before, and yet it's oftentimes laughed at. Because if you think about it, you have these New York Times authors who are these journalists writing really in-depth stories, and yet they're expected to leave, a minimum number of tweets per day from their personal accounts as a part of their job. And how can they be expected to do this in-depth reporting while also doing 140 characters of trivial on an ongoing basis throughout the course of the day? And if they said, no, I'm not going to do it, somehow that is seen as them not doing their job because they're not going out and posting on this arbitrary software service that has only been popular since 2007. And this is what he's calling this new economy where there's a focus on using technology, and also in an area that Newport calls the knowledge work, right? People who do knowledge work. So knowledge work is, that consists of coders, programmers or journalists, or very much, quite honestly, what we do. We are knowledge workers. We run a ministry where we're trying to think of ways to connect in people's lives in meaningful ways. That's knowledge work. We're thinking, and then it's not so much we're not out digging.
We're
holes.
informing a public.
Yeah. And so these things take a lot of mental capacity and organization to be able to do those things. And so two core abilities for thriving in this new economy, particularly for knowledge workers, is to have the ability to quickly be able to master hard things. And I want to circle back to that in a minute. And then the ability to produce at an elite level, which is both in terms of quality and speed, right? So not just doing a good job, but like to be able to write a really high quality book, which is one of the things that one of my goals of the year is a nonfiction book that's of high quality and life-changing impact. That's an elite level. And to be able to do that, I have to be able to focus at a deep level and quickly master hard things that I may not understand yet. St. Louis Marie de Montfort's particular teachings, be able to master those in a way that I can make it accessible to a modern day audience. That's a huge and lofty goal. But to do that takes it beyond the mid-level of a lot of the things that I feel like, that's good enough. That's been a phrase. It's good enough. Let's get it out there, right? But to quickly be able to master hard things is a skill that when I read this part, I actually have possessed that skill in the past and stopped exercising that skill some time ago. And this is just within our marriage. I used to do this all the time. I accelerated quickly in the IT job world, jumping from one job to the next high-paying job. What did I used to do? If there was a new job opportunity and it said, looking for an X to do Y, what would I do? Baby, we got to go to the bookstore.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
I gotta go, and then what would I buy? These big, thick books that say learn X or learn Y in 24 hours or learn Y in a weekend or that kind of thing. And I used to drill through those books, turn around, go on job interviews, and walk away with a higher paying job or a job that would change our living situation. Now, this was, again, 20 years ago when I would do these things. But that ability, I remember, and I think about it, I'm like, how in the world did I do that? How could I ever master something like it seems like it has become where it seems like an impossible thing. And I think that's because what I've done in its place is train myself to always be on social, always be answering emails, always be doing the shallow in lieu of the deep.
You're excelling in the shallow.
I am a great doggy paddler. Whereas deep diving has not been my skill set these last 15 years. So because of all these technologies keep changing, what's happening is the process of mastering hard things, which quite honestly should be something that we are doing our entire lives, constantly trying to master new hard things, to be able to do it, you need to be able to do it quickly and do it again and again. And so that's kind of what I did. I did that multiple times. I had bookshelves full of these, 2-inch thick books. I got good at it. I figured out how to do it, and then I just continued doing it. So now think about when I talk about having these larger projects, drilling it down to doing the essential thing or doing the one thing. Picking one right now and working on it for the next 3 to 4 weeks might take me longer now than 6 months from now. So if because I'm building up that muscle of doing that skill again, of spending time doing things quickly, learning, going deeply, and being able to do it again and again. And I think about this constantly with learning new skills and wearing new hats. The problem now is with each new skill and each new hat, for me, it comes with the feeling that if I'm not using that skill, I'm wasting time. Or I'm learning a skill and then going, I'm not really going to use this, but I'm spending a lot of time learning. It's like the school of YouTube, right? I just over Lent, and I talked about this. One of the things I did was I did a bunch of JavaScript classes, and I really enjoyed it. Right? This book made me stop and go, do I continue or do I stop? Is there really value in that? Is it bringing me relaxing time when I really need to be relaxing, or is it taking away from my ability to think deeply? I think it actually helped. I think it was a good training ground for thinking more deeply. I was going pretty deep on some of these things.
Yeah, but you also couldn't pull out very easily.
Well, I think
there was a real hook.
That comes with deep work, though.
It had a hook on you.
Yeah.
Which I was a little worried for some things, because it's like, I just got to do one more. I just got to figure this out.
Oh.
I just got to, like that response didn't seem quite ordered correctly. And it became more important than it actually was. And
Yeah. And
I was like, well, what are you working on? How to make this number counter. Okay.
Well, it's because okay.
Yes.
You just made me sound like a doofus when you just work on. It was like telling Lily. It's like, what are you working on, Lily? Just these. I'm figuring out what 3/4 of an apple is. It's like, well, that sounds dumb, but she's learning a concept that applies on a greater level.
But I understand you're doing coding work, and so it was a whole big puzzle to solve.
My point is I was putting on a new hat that I didn't necessarily need to be putting on that hat. So that was one thing that came to me. But the thinking, I think one of the things that happens, and I've thought about this a lot in the last week, is that if you don't produce, you're not going to thrive. And so you can produce on small things, or you can produce on big things. Because if you're not, if think about what we do, right? With Rosary Army, if we don't produce something of substance, the ministry won't thrive and continue. And so part of what I've been struggling with, and part of the boredom that I've been feeling lately, is because a lot of the things that I've been dealing with so much of the first part of this year has just all been email and correspondence and things that I didn't feel like were moving a bigger ball for the apostolate. I want to do significantly large things of great impact. That's when I feel like we're cranking. When we launched School of Mary last year, I felt like we did something of significance, but I want to keep magnifying that level of significance on an ongoing basis. And again, what this book is saying is like, well, then what are you doing on you being on Facebook, posting that you just did something with Rosary Army, and 10 people might click on that link. Are you really moving that ball? And it's like, no, but you feel like you have to do it because that's what you're told that you have to do.
Right. Somebody said you have to do that.
Yeah, just like the New York Times people being told by their media desk that they have to post 10 tweets a day. Mm-hmm. Do you? And this was one of the first quotes at the beginning of this book. And at first I went, ooh, a Dominican. It was from a French Dominican scholar from the early 20th century. So not that long ago. Mm-hmm. I think he died in the 1940s, and I'm going to get his name wrong. It's Antonin Dalmache Sertilianges, I think it's. But he wrote a book in the early 20th century called The Intellectual Life, which is all about learning. It's about going deep and about understanding things. And he explained how to enter into a state of really learning. And the quote is it's highfalutin, all right, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's when I first read this, before he explained that it was a Dominican, I went, oh, this is going to be new agey. This is a goofy. This quote does not sound like it came from a Dominican philosopher. Okay,
well,
but he says, "Let your mind," and this is again when you're trying to learn something and you're trying to go deep. Let your mind become a lens, thanks to the converging rays of attention. Let your soul be all intent on whatever it is that is established in your mind as a dominant, wholly absorbing idea. Okay, now take that and relate that to your prayer life.
I'm about to say, man, if we can only just put God there.
Imagine you pick up your rosary,
point.
right? Imagine you pick up your rosary, and then you read this quote before you started praying. Let your mind become a lens, thanks to the converging rays of attention. Let your soul be all intent on whatever it is that is established in your mind as a dominant, wholly absorbing idea, and then begin praying. Okay. Imagine that.
Okay.
Now take that. Hold on. I'm going to let you speak in a minute.
All
but
right.
take that idea, and when I sat down last week and started working on that learning path, a week ago, that I had been postponing for a month. I said that. I went, let my mind become a lens, focusing all my attention like rays onto this, and put all my soul, have it be intent on what I'm working on right now. This is the most dominant. I chose that as the most important project on my entire to-do list. Everything was that for that day. And then it got accomplished. So what were you going to say?
Well, I think I did something a little bit like this just this past weekend at Mass. Most of our listeners know that we attend the traditional Latin Mass, and it is very common when you attend that liturgy to bring a missal with you so that you can follow along if you would like to with the prayers and the readings and read the propers.
Why didn't you have your missal with you this weekend, Jennifer?
I have one in the van, but I've been really enjoying the Benedictus, which is who publishes
Sophia.
Sophia Press. They publish that. It's kind of like Magnificat, but for the Latin Mass. And you have subscribed to it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you just bring it with you. And
I grab it, but I know it's for you, and I
Yeah.
just didn't think about it this weekend.
And I actually looked up on top of the fridge where it normally is, and I almost reached up there and felt around for it. And I'm like, he has it.
I felt like
don't-
such a bad husband.
I don't need to do this.
We got to church, and you're like, did you bring the Benedictus? Ooh.
No. But again,
But I have my missal. You can have my missal.
no, I always keep my missal in the van, but I've lately I just wanted them, and I said, you know what? This is fine. I am just gonna go. And I was really thinking of our son Ben, who every time when he comes home from school and he goes to Latin Mass with us, he doesn't hold any book, he doesn't read anything, he just sits there and just listens. And I'm like, I don't know how he can do that. How is he going deep in this Mass and staying connected to the prayers? Well, now I was like pulling a Ben. I was sitting there and I thought, you know what? I'm going to double down on this. I'm just going to observe everything and let that be part of the new way of absorbing with like a lens. I'm just stirring up my capacity to have awe and wonder towards what's happening at the altar, and really focusing with great intensity on the Eucharist when the elevation is occurring and I'm seeing the host for the first time and anticipating that and waiting for it and making sure I'm reacting as I should, but allowing myself not to have, I don't want to call it a crutch, but it can be a bit of a distraction, the book itself. And you get so fixated on reading and reading and reading that maybe you're not really absorbing as you should. So I thought, I'm going to work on the other muscles. I'm going to not read anything, not hold a book, and see what I could retain just by listening and looking and just allowing my mind to sort of observe as many of the little details as I can and see how they all connect together. And I actually felt a little bit more like a child, because that's what kids do at Mass. They don't read any book. They're just looking and noticing. So I thought, I want to do that. And it was wonderful. I really enjoyed that experience of being as fully available as I could be to the experience of worship at Mass. And
So you let
going
your-
back to Calvary once again.
You let your mind become a lens and just focused on that. Yeah.
That's what I was doing.
And so that description really reminded me of like the times I talked about where I needed to learn a quick bit of software or whatever in a short period of time, or even the idea that was something that another writer whose name was Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, it's a Polish name, excuse me for mispronouncing it. He wrote a book, I think it was in 2008, called Flow, and it's the psychology of optimal experience. I didn't read the whole book, but I've read, blogs and posts about this. This idea of that when you do go into a deep work zone, and this happened last week when I was working on that learning path, and I'm getting these videos posted, and I'm writing the descriptions, and I'm seeing it coming together, and it's all becoming one in front of me, and it became more exciting to keep working on it. And I fell into this thing of flow, right? You're just in the zone, right? You could call it that too. You're so focused, and when you can get in that flow, everything starts suddenly going really smoothly and almost more easily. This thing that I'd struggled to do for a month suddenly became really easy. And there have been times where in my past where like I'm working on a writing project, and that's happened. And suddenly 2 or 3 hours just go by effortlessly. And here I'm talking about writing lately has been almost painful. But to get in a zone where that's working and I go deep and I'm so creative in that moment, And, you know, even when I've struggled with prayer, it made me think about periods of desolation, right? You know, sometimes you have periods of consolation and periods of desolation. I've always thought that those two things are those are up to God's will, which one I'm going to enter into. You can't control either one of those things. I think I've kind of treated getting into the zone the same way, that I have no influence over that, but I actually do. And same thing with prayer. Your decision to pray is your decision. You could take it as deep or as shallow as you want it, right? But if you put your lens all on your prayer and say, it's not easy, but I'm going to go into this, suddenly you become less frustrated in whatever it is that you're trying to do, whether it be a work-related thing or a faith-based thing or whatever it might happen to be. But that idea of flow, it came up a few times in the book about deep work. And again, you know, just really summarizing this deep work, it's about a deliberate practice of saying, I'm deliberately going to do this very concerted amount of work in this very focused area, and that's it. And I like that idea that it's a deliberate practice. What is practice? Practice makes perfect. Practice makes things better. Practice means that you can recover something that maybe you lost even. And I was starting to think that I'd lost an ability, that to be able to learn quickly hard things maybe was something that I had lost and wasn't going to be able to recover. And I think about when I was a teenager and during the summers, one of my favorite things was I would sit on the bed for hours reading a book nonstop. And I've been saying, well, I don't know why, but I can't do that anymore. I've fractured my brain from Twitter and Facebook and emails and everything else over the last several years. But that doesn't mean that it's gone forever. And when we think about deliberate practice within hard work and what that actually requires, there's a couple of core components that Cal Newport writes about. That the first requirement, the first core component, I should say, of a deliberate practice of deep work is that your attention is focused very tightly on a specific skill you're trying to improve or an idea that you're trying to master. So that mastery might be coming out through the actual writing that you're doing or the work that you're, whatever it might be, but a specific skill you're trying to improve or an idea you're trying to master. And number two, you receive feedback so that you can correct your approach to keep your attention exactly where it's most productive. Now, that feedback doesn't mean you go out and you ask someone for it, but the feedback can come in the form of just how do you feel? Or if you put something out into the world, what's the response to that? And then how do you go back and do it again? Or in my case, the feedback I used to get when I'd get one of those tech books, I'd read that tech book and I'd get the job. That was solid feedback, right? And so you're looking for those types of inputs, not necessarily, hey, what do you think about this thing I just wrote? Because that could actually be a distraction if you get bad feedback on that kind of thing. But the idea that and this was a key, this is the third key component, deliberate practice it will not exist alongside distraction. So if you have any distractions, email, Twitter, your phone ringing, I last week I kept getting the little stand notifications on my watch. I disabled those notifications. And then I got a notification of a different sort. I finally took off my watch and tossed it on the other side of the room so I wouldn't hear it buzz. Remove all distractions possible so that you can go into a deep, uninterrupted concentration. And then to learn things quickly, you have to focus intensely without distractions. It's the same kind of thing, right? In other words, to be able to learn, that itself is an act of deep work. And focusing on things in this way, rather than the multitasking, right, or working on multiple projects at once, what's interesting is that more things will be finished, more projects will be finished, even if it may seem like you're ignoring everything else in the short term. And that's just huge. And just to accept that, and they gave this equation, the idea that high quality work produced, which is what I ultimately want. I don't want a lot of mid-quality work produced. I want high quality work produced equals the time spent times the intensity of focus. I've always treated it as high quality work produced equals time spent. And that doesn't make it happen. The intensity of your focus has to be there as well. So how much, and so even like today in preparing this subject, right, and preparing this podcast, how much high intensity time to be able to put in the work so that this podcast is going to be of a higher quality than others where I'm just like, hey, I read this book and here's what I remembered, right? I actually spent some time to boost the quality a little bit. Hopefully it's coming across that way. But there's 4 different philosophies. This is one of the things that when I said I didn't want to talk about this with you the other day because I want to save it for the show, there's 4 different philosophies that you can entertain in trying to get deep work done. One of them is a monastic philosophy. So there are some people that say, I will not have email, I will not have Twitter, I'm only going to do my work, and when I do my work, I have a shed built out in the woods, and I'm going to go out there, and no one can interrupt me ever. That's very monastic, right? And that's not always realistic for people to be able to do, but there are writers who just say, you will never find me on social media, and I don't answer emails. And that's all there is to it. He gave a story of one writer that gives a snail mail address, and all of the letters that go to that, he has an assistant read them all, and once a quarter, the assistant will give him the letters that are worth him actually responding to, and he'll batch them all up over the course of a couple of days, respond to all of them, and he doesn't look at any more correspondence for another quarter of the year.
Wow.
And I'm like, how do I do that? Because that's awesome. But that's monastic. Then there's this bimodal type of thing, and Carl Jung did this. He had a place that he had built, a tower, actually a stone tower, that he would go and work at for part of the year. But then the other part of the year, he's in meetings and he's dealing with clients and he's out and about, and so he just kind of figured out
in community, out of community.
Yeah, and so he would split it that way. And then there's a rhythmic, which is I think what I'm falling into, which is part of my day, because you can't escape email entirely. It's impossible.
And you can't escape your family.
You can't escape family. So this rhythmic of like these are my dedicated hours today that I'm going to be doing that. And so I've actually started to develop are my blocks of time? What do they look like on a writing day, on a podcasting day, on a other type of project day,
on a Sunday?
Well, and that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So the companion, opposite to deep work is the shallow work. And that's a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? The things that don't bring about much impact. And so I think about even social media and Rosary Army. Very few people have been changed in their lives from the time that Greg Willits has spent on social media versus the thousands that I can impact by putting together a good podcast or a newsletter. And so the impact level, when I worked at the Archdiocese of Denver, that was immediately after our radio show ended. I remember talking to my friend Kevin, and I'd been there maybe about 10 months. And I remember saying to him, I said, I think what saddens me is I used to have more impact in a single day's broadcast than I feel like I've had all year long here. And that just depressed me so much because that desire to have impact, well, what I was doing, I should have looked at it and said, okay, well, then what am I going to do to change the level of impact I'm having rather than just continuing to go at the level that I am in having that impact at that time. And so there's so many other things that this book talks about that I could go into so much more detail. The thing that I have found to be so incredibly beneficial and interesting is the focus on it and then how much I've gotten done as a result of it. But the freedom that I have felt in allowing myself to do the deep work, I've actually felt really good about myself again. And so going back to that idea of like, it's not about what I do, but who I am. I feel like what the deep work is allowing me to do is actually be more of who I am versus doing all these things like answering emails. He gives a great example of like of people who do spend a huge amount of time answering emails or going into calls or meetings rather than saying, no, I'm not going to do that. It's like that people tend to think that people put much more weight into awaiting your response than you think that they do. So for example, if someone goes, hey, can you do this thing for me? They're not sitting there on the other end hitting refresh 1,000 times waiting for Greg Willits to respond. Mm-hmm. But the feeling is that oftentimes, and I was so glad to read this, I'm not the only person who has felt this huge responsibility and burden that I have to answer everyone. And he says that's actually an entire global society issue that has come up with the ease of email over the last 30 years, that there has been this new erroneous perception that just because you send an email that you deserve a response. And oftentimes, if you think about the emails that you send, how much pre-work did you put into it, and how much work do you expect from the person that's responding back? So, for example, hey, can we get together sometime soon? I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to pick your brain. Very common.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why didn't you say, I would like to get together for 15 minutes to talk to you about this specific XYZ thing. My availability is Tuesday at 8, Wednesday at 9, and Thursday at 10. If none of these are available to you, please give me 3 ideas of when we could meet to specifically talk about those things. Well, that's completely different than, hey, can I get together and pick your brains? Well, you're putting all the onus on the other person.
Right.
And I suddenly realized 90% of the emails that we receive are emails where the onus of all the work is put on. And no wonder I always feel overwhelmed, and I tend to focus on those things because I'm trying to avoid the feeling that I'm letting down 100 people all at once whenever we get those emails. And so it's easier, however, to answer those emails because that ties into something called the principle of least resistance. And just this morning that happened where I was working on my deep work project. I came down to talk to you about the podcast. And next thing I know, I realized I skipped from my deep work into the podcast. The podcast is the easier thing to do. And I easily slipped out of it. So I actually read the whole book in a week. I can't tell you the last time I read a book in a week.
That's pretty fast for you. That's good.
And you know, I think I enjoy talking about these kinds of things, particularly when I see the value of it. In the last week, I've edited almost 100 pages out of my novel. I resubmitted it to I shouldn't say I resubmitted it. I requeried a publisher, and the publisher actually invited me to send my novel to him. That's huge. I have already posted one of the brand new learning paths. Again, the Devout Life has been posted, and it's available to you now. I've already begun most of the work on the second one that's going to be launching in the next 2 weeks. And then the third one, I did work on that as well and got a project on it. So all 3 of these things are going to be released by the end of June. And on top of that, all the other things that we're putting together, I'm focusing on this one particular project right now, and I'm trying to get ahead on my novel. And it feels awkward, but I've said I'm going to spend the next three weeks, and I'm going to wrap up all that work, particularly because that publisher said that they want to see it. And I'm going to send it off, and then I'm going to have that whole free time that I keep trying to parse little bits and pieces throughout the course of my week in whatever little bit I can. I'll have these opened up blocks so that I can focus on even more things. And I want to jump into that nonfiction book that I said I want to get done this year. So it's pretty interesting just to be able to step back and see how something as simple as a book can reorganize.
Well, you were
and everything.
close. I think like you said earlier, you kind of knew these things, but something about the way this author presented this information was that it knocked it all into place.
I needed someone else to say, it's okay to do what you've been wanting to do, to focus on one thing and then just do it. I needed to see that. And it just made, but the fact that he laid out science and everything else to show it will work. It really made me want to go off and do it. So,
well, good job.
Thank you.
Good job.
So next week you get to plan the topic. I feel like I've done a huge amount of planning the last couple of weeks, and I've monopolized. And you've just patiently sat there and listened while I was talking. And
You're welcome.
And so next week you get to do the show, and then the week after that we're going to have Emily Jaminet back on the program because we're getting ready to launch the Sacred Heart series, Enthrone Your Home on School of Mary. And so while Emily was here in the studio, we recorded a show with her, and so we're excited to share that with you very soon. And lots of other great stuff coming up, but we're staying focused on our deep work. What else you got? That's it?
Oh, that's it. We're good.
Pray your rosary every single day.
And do whatever it takes to be holy. God bless.
Talk to you soon, folks. Go do some deep work.